what is creativity, and how do you apply this creativity thing to everyday life? That's what my show's about today. I'm HeathMD, psychoanalyst for Freudalicious Mind. Get to know how your mind works and live authentically. And so, creativity, whether you're doing something with your downtime during the day, because a lot of people have a lot of downtime lately. We've got these changes with business in the United States with the social distance and all. Whether you're trying to do something with the downtime and don't know what to do, or if you're trying to create something or learn something, creativity is this process that engages your mind and engages your unconscious in ways that surprises you. And where does surprise come from? It's from this stuff under the surface within us. And so that's what I'm here to talk about. Now, creativity is a magical process, right? Where did that piece of art that I generated come from? Or if you create a new song, if you write lyrics or if you make a new melody, it comes from a place that we're not sure about because there's hints about it, this unconscious realm, but how do we figure it out? It's only sort of secondhand that this stuff emerges. And so how to optimize the space for this creativity to do what it does is what we need to pay attention to because it's a really surprise. And whenever there's a surprise in life, it means that something that our unconscious is clicked in some way or another, especially if we surprise ourselves. It's why it's unconscious because we're not quite aware of it from day to day. And so more on this unconscious thing in a second. But I want to talk about creativity research because there's a whole field of research on creativity that's opened up over the last, 20, 30 years. And they find a lot of consistencies in the creative process for human beings. One of the things that they discover is that there is a process over and over again, whether you're trying to learn something new and figure it out all of a sudden, or if you're trying to um, create a scientific discovery, if you're trying to figure something out, and it's not just a logical chain, it's not like algebra to figure out this last thing, but it's something that we can't figure out. And maybe you're the first person to figure this out, if it's a work of art or a melody or a scientific discovery. Or if you're just trying to figure out which cereal to eat this morning and which one, how do I decide? There's a process. Sometimes this happens fast. Sometimes it's more conscious than at others. But here's the process. It goes from learning about the thing and if you're trying to make a piece of art or if it's a scientific discovery, it's a kind of a more formalized thing where you have to learn as much as you can about the thing that you're going to create, that you're hoping to create. And then you end up learning around that. So if you're trying to understand uh, quantum physics, then you might start learning something about space exploration or some related field. And so you'll learn more and more around it. But then that's when the creativity happens because you have to sit with it for a while. There's this, I think they call it an incubation period. There's this period of time that we have to let it kind of simmer and we go play soccer or we watch a TV show or something besides just thinking about it. Because if you just think about it, whatever it is, you're not going to come up with a creative solution. So as you sit with this, and as you live life with this kind of the under the surface stuff pops up. It's almost like tips of an iceberg where it you come up with an idea. Wow. And you got to catch the idea and write it down or remember it or maybe I have notes app on my phone and where I put my ideas all the time because if you sometimes it's kind of like a dream. If you don't remember it, you'll kind of lose it because your unconscious is doing all this work and presenting you with these little ideas as it's going along. The ideas can start to stick together and you can use the idea to create something bigger. And that's creativity. And so to make a space to create, to be patient with yourself so that this stuff can emerge up and listen for it when it does. That's what creativity is about. So, but another aspect of this is that the creativity researchers talk about capital C creativity and lowercase c creativity. And the capital C creativity is what people often think of as creative. There's two things. There's you introduce something really new. You make a new piece of art or a scientific discovery, something like that, and it changes your world. Like it inspires other artists, or if you write a poem and it moves another person emotionally, there's this capital C creativity makes something that has an effect in the world. Um, Little c creativity, not necessarily. It may, everything has an effect in some way or another, but it may be like if you're learning Italian, for instance, and you learn the subjunctive tense. And um, many people before you have learned this piece of grammar, but how are you going to understand this? How are you going to learn it? You have to kind of sit with it for a while because subjunctive in Italian is a little bit different in Spanish, but there's this uncertainty about that tone of verb use that isn't like English. And so I know a little Italian and enough to know that it's really hard to understand this subjunctive tense. And so you have to do the same thing. You have to learn about it, and then you have to let it sit, and then, oh, I get it, and then you can start using it, and that's a little c, lowercase c creativity, and that happens all the time. Like if and many people have done the same discovery before, but it takes a little bit of creativity for you to figure out. What am I going to do with this free time that I have today? Or how am I going to get all this work done? So you have to kind of sit with it. And there's two problems with that. One is that you got to be patient, and two is that how do I say it? Our unconscious mind is a mess. It's a mess under there, and it all makes sense to itself. But when we look at this stuff kind of percolating up, it makes no sense. Like dream content or fantasies, daydreams that we have, it doesn't make much sense when we're trying to process it. So I'll talk about that in a second. This messiness of the unconscious, but like the patience to be patient with something. I knew someone who was a food scientist that worked for a food manufacturing company, and they were very bothered that they didn't have anything to do. Their boss purposefully didn't give them anything to do. Their job was to invent a um, a new type of food for this company, and there was a whole team of these people that would invent these new kinds of forms of food. And but how do they do it? They had to clear their plate. They had to at times not do anything, or maybe their mind would wander, or maybe they'd read, or maybe they'd look at other companies' forms of this food, but they discover something. And it was the hardest thing for this food scientist that I knew because I'm just supposed to sit there. It's counterintuitive. We're supposed to work when we're at work, right? So also, if the same thing, if you're binge watching a TV show, House, for instance, and don't ever think that it's wasted time. If you watch for 3 days straight episodes of House, and you might not learn much, or maybe you will, but you'll get some ideas, and some way or another, that's going to work for you. If nothing else, to give your mind a rest. To if you don't think about much when you're watching the TV, at least it gives you this space in which you can begin to think about new things, begin to create other kinds of things. Another way this plays out, this patience with yourself, is that if you learn a skill, like if you learn to knit and you get really good at knitting, but then you get tired of knitting and you stop knitting after a day or a month or even a year, it's not wasted because you've learned how to learn to knit. You've understood about the knots and things like that. You've learned how to learn. This is the way graduate school works often, is that it's not just the information, but the way that you learn, so that you can take that education and do something completely different. And so there's everything you do is potentially helpful for the next thing that you do. And if you can see it that way, building on itself. Um, there's a book, The Art of Practicing, that helped me a lot when I was learning how to play guitar, because practicing is a hassle, right? It feels like wasted time when you play the same scale over and over for an hour. But the fact is, not just is it pro kind of programming it into your hands, and you hear the sound of the scales and you see new aspects to the patterns, but also there's something kind of mystical, something very powerful about the experience of practicing. And that's what the art of practicing this book is about, that you have to value the practice as an exercise in and of itself. Uh, and so to value the whatever it is that you're doing while you're waiting for the ideas to come up from your unconscious, right? Another way is that, like with apps, sometimes apps that help you learn on your phone, for instance, will be what's called gamified. Like it becomes a game, like Duolingo. Duolingo is an app that helps you learn new languages. I think it's a free app still. It used to be. This is how I began to learn Italian. Is through Duolingo will tell you, it will give you exercises, and if you and it gives you rewards, and it's not monetary, it's just a little star you get, or if you miss a day of doing it, you get demerits. You lose some of your momentum with the score. And so this gamification, this scoring, so that it's giving you even, kind of play rewards, it gets keeps you engaged. If you can gamify uh, the learning a new skill, or learning a new language. This is just another way to tolerate the uncertainty of what's going to come up, because that's the trick. If you can kind of clear your plate so that the creative process can be allowed and things can pop up. But the other thing, our unconscious is a mess. It's messy down there. And here's one of the ways that it's a mess, is that we start doubting ourselves. And if, especially something as powerful as a creation, if you create something, it's an expression of you that's very visible. Like if you write a poem, or if you paint a painting or something like that, it's really you right there, and what you've created. And you have to be okay with it. Too often people have doubt or shame. I know a lot of artists, and almost universally, artists doubt their work. Oh, it needs to be a little bit more blue, or I could have worked on that flower a little bit more. A friend of mine, Jana, I'm hoping you're watching, because you posted a painting you did the other day, and I really enjoyed it, and I think you did too. Truth be told, but when I said I like the sense of movement in this painting, you were like, "Oh, I'm just practicing." And true, you're just practicing. You're getting to know some of the techniques, but also there was this sense of movement and color in this painting that even though it's sure you're an amateur at painting, and you should be proud or excited or hopeful about the elements that you did put into this. And in general, if we create something, the power of something coming up from the unconscious can be intimidating sometimes, and our natural human reaction is often to doubt it, or too often shame is kind of woven into us. So we have an automatic shame reaction to things that make us vulnerable, or express us too vividly. And if you can be see that as an indication, not of something to be ashamed of, but as something that's very expressive of yourself, and know that everybody creates things like this, and to allow yourself to tolerate it, and not get all hung up with the shame. because and that's what I mean by the messiness of the unconscious, that these shame reactions, the self-doubt. Freud, Sigmund Freud, wrote a lot about theories about how the mind worked. He was kind of an early explorer of this stuff, and in the three essays he wrote about that, optimally, the drive from the unconscious comes up and it's met with a drive to do things in the world. But if it's shunted, if sometimes it takes the form of symptoms instead, like this drive to do things, to create, ends up being like anxiety or self-doubt, or it gets kind of shunted to the side instead of coming up as creativity. You can't help that to some degree. It just kind of happens, and sometimes therapy is helpful for that. If you can get in therapy and decrease those symptoms and help the drive be expressed in more helpful ways. But also know that when you create something, you may have anxiety about it, or shame or self-doubt, and that's if you can allow those feelings to kind of pass through you and not get too hung up on them, so that you still enjoy uh, and are excited by the stuff coming up from the surface. That's a really helpful kind of way to see the stuff from underneath. So, uh, uh, not that you have to put your painting in context. It may or may not be um, something that you can sell, and it's never great to brag. But it is good to be proud and excited, and maybe share your excitement about a painting, whether it's um, whether you're still an amateur or a real pro at painting. So so the tricks to creating, whether you're creating how you're going to spend your free time today, or how to learn this language that you're learning, or writing poetry, whatever you're going to create, you have to two things. You have to be bold with it and allow it to come out however it's going to come out, and you have to be really patient with it, because like I said earlier, the phases of creativity, that middle phase, the most important phase, is one that looks like you're not doing a whole lot. It looks like you're just waiting for it to emerge, and doing other things while you're doing that. Maybe you're learning other painting techniques. Sometimes psychotherapy works this way. We'll be talking about the day's events, and suddenly kind of a new dimension on it will come up, and often that's the way psychotherapy works, is that we're both surprised by what comes up. It's never like a formula, like you figure it out and now you're all better. It's always a discovery process where you understand yourself. And I'm suggesting that we treat life that way, that a life is kind of a self-discovery process, and if you can create something, um, that's kind of an ongoing process all the time. I appreciate everybody tuning in. Please subscribe to my YouTube channel. I'm here on Thursdays, noon Central, here in the U.S., and I'll see you next week.